can you really revive a car that was flooded to the point where salt water entered every major mechanical component and then sat for months? That's like asking if my stepmom will attend church today. We can all be hopeful, but it will still require a lot of pumping, filling, and fluid exchanging before we can get our final answer, which starts with the removal of our oil pan. The inside of our motor looks pretty good considering how much water initially came out of here, but when it comes to flood cars, cleanliness is next to godliness.
There we go. Ooh, look at the pickup tube. There's all sorts of nasty goo in here that all just needs to be basically pulled out. We need to let it sit with some degreaser and just clean everything really good. We're the closest we've been since we got this car from actually going and cranking over our ZR1. We got the pan super clean, our windage tray super clean. All we have to do is bolt that back into the pan. I took the pickup all apart here, flushed it all out. It's all clean and it's bolted back in place. We just have to install an O-ring right here, and our oil pan gasket comes with the O-ring, which is really convenient. You can't buy a ZR1 pan gasket from GM anymore. They don't make it, so someone figured that out. They make this aftermarket one. They charge a whole lot of money for it. It's cost about $120, but hey, when you carve out a niche for yourself, you're worth that extra money, and really that's the least of our concerns right now. Let's go ahead and assemble everything and crank this baby over. The oil filter that came on the car was really stuck in place. I had to pull out the oil filter pliers just to turn it off, but we've got it out. We could see a little bit of that milky oil residue on the inside here. This we're gonna set aside, and I bought 3 of these nice new oil filters. I've already got some oil on the seal there, and I bought 3 of them because obviously we're gonna flush this oil, but given how clean everything looks, and obviously our pan is really nice and clean now, hopefully we'll only need about 2 of these. We'll see what comes out after we go right now, fill this guy back up with oil, and try to crank things over. All right, we got 5 quarts down here. I got to go grab one more bottle. This engine takes about 9 quarts, but if you do your own oil changes, and especially if you're on a budget and you got an older car, you're going to want to check out Pennzoil's high mileage motor oil, as it contains seal conditioners and other additives that keeps old engines like the one in our Corvette here running at their best. All right, fresh oil, fresh filter. We still have our ignition system disconnected here. We have no spark plugs installed. Currently, all we want to do is crank this car over without fuel or spark. We just want to circulate all that fresh oil we put in the engine. Our fuse panel is right here, and in the bottom right corner you can see it says FP1. That's for fuel pump number 1. I've already went ahead and pulled that out, but I also have fuel pump number 2 fuse pulled out, and that lives underneath the dash, underneath the panel here. I don't know if you can see down below, but you see there is a fuse panel kind of tucked up underneath there. In the standard C4s, there was one underneath the hood. I'm guessing they rerouted it here on the ZR1 because there wasn't as much space. There's one last thing we got to deal with before we can actually test fire this car, and that's our VATS, or our Vehicle Anti-Theft System. It's basically an immobilizer that runs off of a resistor built into the key. That resistor has a specific value that matches with a module down here in the kick panel. If those 2 things don't match when you go to turn it over, well, it just locks you out of the car for 3 minutes until you could try again. Remember, this car didn't come with the original keys. I've got a replacement key barrel in place with just dummy keys, so there's no resistor built in, but since it's so old and antiquated, you can easily defeat this system. Here's what I did. I took the wiring harness off of our new key barrel and plugged it in to where the VATS plug is, and I cut it at the opposite end. So if this car ever wanted to go back to factory at one point, we could easily do that. And all you have to do is find the appropriate value resistor, wire it in the end of these wires, and boom, you'll defeat the system entirely. There's only one little problem. GM used 15 different values for the resistance of the system. And you don't really know which one you have unless you have the original key to test with a multimeter. Again, we don't have that original key. So people sell these sets of the 15 different resistors online. They cost about $10. I've got a set here. And so you just have to go resistor by resistor
and keep wiring them in, attempting to turn the ignition on the car until the security light goes out. As you can imagine, this process could take a long while, and it took me about 30 minutes to finally land on the right resistor. It's in place and our VATS is defeated, but we can go back to the original key with the resistor in it at any time. Like I said, it's easily reversible and easy to wire back up. But for right now, with the VATS disabled, let's go and try and test fire our ZR1.
We have the security light flashing, but we crank to position 1 here. There goes the security light. We are ready to try and start this car. Got a couple lights blinking at us. I don't see anything that should stop us. 3, 2, 1. Nothing. Look at this. I'm going to show you over here when I do that again. 3, 2, 1. Everything just kind of blinks and goes out. And it's definitely not cranking.
When you hear absolutely nothing, like we just did trying to crank a car over, it's classified as a no crank, no start. And if this were a modern car, we could hook up a diagnostic code reader to it, and it would generally throw a code as to why the car didn't start and lead you right to the problem. This is not a modern car, so it does not have an OBD2 port. It does have an OBD1 port, something I've never used before. But before we even get there, we got to start with something very obvious, which is this starter. It didn't even click. It didn't make any noises. So is it operating? And if a starter gets waterlogged, like it did in the Flood Total Dodge Viper we worked on recently, it can get caked up with all sorts of dirt and debris that's in that water and really just fry it. The other funny thing is when I Googled the starter for this car, there's actually an old service bulletin specifically for the starters, which included this model year ZR1, that after you wash the engine bay, water collects in the valley of this engine where the starter is located, and that water pretty much just kills it.
Now the water made its way into the transmission, likely through its vent hole, which is going to be located somewhere near the top of the transmission up here. If it got that high, there's a chance it got slightly higher, which is where it starts to get really dark back there, and that is the backside of the motor where the starter sits. Before we spend a good amount of time ripping this plenum off the top of the engine to see if our starter is the issue, I'm going to take my scope camera here. We got 3 lenses at the end of this probe. We're going to fish it right in the valley. We're going to monitor the inside here to see if we can find any signs of water intrusion or corrosion near that starter.
There's definitely some junk under here, and while I can't really tell whether that came via the floodwaters or maybe an animal left it behind, it means that we're going to have to pull this plenum up and off the car, which we're going to do right now. But really quick, last time I used the scope to check in the cylinders of this Corvette. A bunch of you guys messaged me asking where you could pick one of these up, so I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to this VVOR scope camera down in the description box. What I really like about this one in particular is the fact that it has those 3 lenses, but it costs way less than a lot of the ones I've seen that have like 1 or 2 lenses. Usually, if you get a dual lens endoscope, they cost well over $100. This is a triple lens and it costs just a little bit over $60, so the price point is phenomenal. And if you look really close, there's some threads at the end of the probe itself here because it comes with a few little really cool attachments. One is a magnet, so like if you drop a bolt down in the engine bay, you could see it with the camera and then pick it up with the magnet. Another one is a hook. So this is just a really handy tool to have, and again, for a little bit over $60, it's a no-brainer. Let's see. All right, we've got a bit of a mystery to figure out here. Keep in mind where the water line was drawn on the door. Keep in mind that we maybe can't always trust that water line. With the plenum up and off the car, I'm realizing I didn't order nearly enough parts. Look at all this junk on top of our ignition coils here. And the ignition coils are really tall, but it's only on top of our ignition coils. Look at the other side where the plenum sat over. It's really nice and clean. We can either guess one of 2 things happened: that our flood water sloshed high enough to bring all this dirt and debris up here, or if we look closer, I do see a few little droppings in here. This looks a lot more like an animal lived in here than it was flooded. However,
Got to think again, we got to get underneath these ignition coils here to get to the starter. Since the starter sits a bit lower, maybe it is possible that that starter got flooded and is causing our issues. Well, we'll find out in just a few moments when we get it up and out of the car and we bench test it. All right, I think everything's out of the way. Yes, this metal plate is the last thing. And my gosh, this has not been the most fun job in the world, but we could be working on a Volkswagen Touareg, which requires you to drop the entire engine to take the starter out. And there it is. The funny thing is, it looks cleaner in the valley of the engine where the starter is sitting than it did on top of the ignition coils. Go figure. But really, we won't know if this thing works or not until we just pull it out. It looks like it just comes out with a couple bolts. Hopefully that's the case. True nightmare, this one. These bolts that hold this starter are on so tight. I've already sprayed oil on them a while ago. You just hear a crack? The other side did the same thing. So yeah, the trick here was to basically dismantle the starter on the bracket, get it out of the way so you can get to this bolt. Let me show you this. This is an extractor right here, the open-ended wrench. Slipped this bolt here. I said during the plenum removal, this is probably the hardest part of the job. It has progressively gotten harder and harder until we got to the starter. Let me just zip these last two out. Come on, you son of a bitch. If this starter is not broken, I will be severely disappointed. And you got to turn these starters in. They don't make them anymore, they just rebuild them. So they're not cheap. And I want it to be broken because that was just way too freaking much work for it not to be. Let's bench test this starter really quick. I've got the ground hooked up to the bracket of our starter motor, and then we also have the power going to the power lead here. And then our ignition wire is hooked up using this test lead. All I'm going to do is tap it to the power here. I don't know if you could see that, but when I did it, there was a spark, and obviously nothing is happening. We'd be looking for this shaft to pop out here. I'll do this again. See the spark? So this is officially dead. That is good news. That is why likely our ZR1 is not starting. Now, what some people will try and do when the starter fails on the fly, they'll tap it to see if they can loosen it up. No. Okay, this starter is totally fried. Let's toss that to the side. We have to use that for a core return because you can only buy these ZR1 starters as a remanufactured unit. We're gonna hook it up in the same way. We've got the ground here, power here. Let's hook up our test lead to the ignition connector. Now we're just gonna touch it again to the positive. There you go. You can see this one is nice, healthy, ready to go. Hopefully this gets our ZR1 up and running. Now before we install the new starter, our service bulletin tells us to check the existing drain hole, which is sitting back here in the valley of the engine for any sort of buildup. And as you can see, ours is just loaded with dirt. I'm going to get a little bit of cleaner, get it wet in here, and then I'm going to continue to just kind of pick this away until we can fit the screwdriver all the way through. And then our service bulletin also tells us to the right of that hole, they want you to drill a supplemental hole. All right, starter's in place. All we got to do is get those two bolts in, connect our two leads to it, and this motor should crank over. The ignition system's still all disconnected and our fuel pump fuse is also out. I went and reconnected the battery here. I'm very hopeful and semi-confident we're gonna get this to crank now. All right. Foot on the clutch, keys right here. Here we go. Moment of truth. Oh! Here, I'll do that one more time. Let's see. Oh, wow. Our battery's already losing juice. It works though.
Now that our ZR1 finally cranks over, we'll need some spark to get things running. And since it was a hassle to remove the plenum and we found all that crud underneath, I replaced all our ignition coils before reassembling everything. Then we quickly swapped out batteries, and all we really need now is some good fuel. And luckily, it's really easy to check the fuel systems on these old Corvettes.
We want to get a sample of this gas because according to the sender on the dash, it is completely full. When you look in there, it is to the brim. And so if we've got a full fuel tank, it might not just be full with gas. What I've got is this line all the way to the bottom. We're going to go hit the button and just get a smidge in this glass jar and see what it looks like. Keep going. All right, good. Yep. This looks really good. If this was mixed with water, you'd see a bit of it separate at the bottom. We don't know how long this fuel's been sitting, but it's not obviously turned to varnish, so we'll just go put some octane booster or methanol product in there to give us a better chance of success the first time we try to fire it up. So Sage disappeared on us, and we ended up with Ben, and hopefully he'll make it past day one. This is day one.
Oh, no.
He's already got an armful of fuel.
Yeah.
And right now he is pulling out the fuel filter because he told me, he said, before you start this thing, you're going to really want a fresh fuel filter. I said, that's a great idea. It was like $10 at the auto parts store. So we're going to swap this really quick before we go and... I keep saying this, before we go and test fire. We got a lot of little things still to do before we go and test fire this car, but we're almost there. There we go. Perfect.
That doesn't look too bad.
No, it looks really good. As a matter of fact, forget that one we just spent $10 on. Put that one back in. We have a replaced starter. We have a replaced ignition system. Well, for the most part. We also have our intake hooked up. I pulled the filter out of there. It was nice and crispy because it got wet. We've got a car that's pretty darn well hooked up as far as I can tell. With a full tank of fuel. Ben, let's go ahead. We're starting it in first. Oh, yeah. Ooh, look at this.
What is smoking out from here?
Well, wow, I barely let it run. And it ran.
It does run. It sounds pretty darn good, too.
Yeah.
And there's no exhaust in there or anything, so that's why it's loud as hell. But was it holding itself, or were you giving it gas?
No, that was all the car.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead again, Ben.
Almost.
All right, we're just gonna kind of let it clear out from a distance here. There's no exhaust on the ZR1. That's why you saw the smoke coming up out of the cup holders. It's just dumping right out of the center of the car. And there's just some residual transmission fluid that was left over in the cylinders, but we've got a running car. This is pretty awesome. And it's running really darn good too. And it's already starting to clear up. Seen anything?
There's something on the car.
Coolant? Watery?
Can't tell. Little shaky.
Oh, I'm wondering here. I've got an idea of where it's coming out of. Let's just get it up in the air. Oh, dude, you know what that is?
Tell me.
That is not gear oil, which is good news. That's residual crap left over from the exhaust. That's murky salt water.
I see it pouring out.
Oh
of the
my
exhaust
gosh. Yeah. You know, when we first got this car, we suspected that all the water that got into the engine was through a leaky oil pan. It wasn't. It got really high and it went through the exhaust. So, okay, well, that's better to clean up than gear oil, all right?
Absolutely.
Super excited about this ZR1 running. It's the next day, and we are going to run it again right now, but with a specific purpose. We're going to do it a little bit longer to just warm up all the fluids in here, and we went ahead and tidied some things up underneath so we can run it longer. We went and started by hooking back up the cooling system. We know the oil levels are good. We checked the transmission levels. We added about a quart of fluid there. We went and filled up our diff with gear oil. And right now we want to run everything. We want to shift through the gears with it on the lift. And we just want to heat everything up. That way we can then leave it on the lift, dump all those fluids out, and basically keep flushing things until they look really good. Confident about the engine, questionable about the transmission, and well, we had that diff out and clean. So let's get this down and get her running again. All right, we got Ben on the outside. That's because Sage, well, he stopped showing up to work. And we're gonna fire this over right now. He's gonna just make sure nothing looks like it's leaking upon first start. 3, 2, 1. I'm not giving it any gas currently, just have my foot on the clutch. But you can notice that immediately it thinks it's driving, and that is probably because I have it in gear. I'm guessing that this clutch is stuck to the flywheel. Did you see anything come out?
Nope.
All right, let's
Nice
run.
and dry.
All right, let's do that again. All right, we're now in neutral, and the car still thinks it's moving a bit. Shut it off. All right, perfect. We've been running this maybe about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I'm guessing that transmission is nice and warm. I noticed a little bit of coolant coming out down here, but that's because they use these old plastic clamps. We're going to replace those with metal band clamps. It should be a lot more solid. But right now, I want to get this transmission fluid out, see what it looks like, because that's really the only thing stopping us at this point from going and driving the car. Oh, yeah. We're going to need to do that a few more times.
A little milky. It's okay.
All right, Ben, here's what I think we should do. We're going to obviously fill this with fresh gear oil. We're going to leave the oil in because I took the pan apart and I feel way more confident about the engine itself, and it's way less sealed in the transmission. So we'll keep running that same oil until we're satisfied with what this looks like. Then we'll fill this with the appropriate stuff and fill that with that Pennzoil Platinum. Right now we're refilling the gearbox with Pennzoil Synchro Mesh. That's the appropriate manual transmission fluid for our ZR1. We're gonna keep doing that until it comes out nice and clean. So basically, as good of a flush we can get without dismantling the entire gearbox. And this fluid pump is incredible. I just got this thing, and it's really pretty inexpensive, and well, it's not the easiest thing to go and push this gear oil up in there because gear oil is pretty darn thick. It is much cleaner and convenient than any other method I've really tried. Foot on the clutch. 3, 2, 1. Here is third, to fourth, what if we hit the clutch? All right, foot back on the clutch. Let's see what happens when we hit it. Literally, like, yeah, it goes into neutral.
What if we broke it loose?
just, did we unstick it? Look.
Here, let me
Back
see
into
if it's
neutral.
spinning.
Hold on. It might be spinning a little.
Drive shaft isn't spinning.
It's not spinning anymore?
No, I wonder if we broke
Oh.
this.
We might have just broken
Here,
it
put it
loose.
in gear and slowly
All right, look,
release
look.
the clutch.
Here, no, it's in neutral and I just released the clutch.
Yeah.
Hold on, it's not, it's in neutral.
Oh, it's in neutral?
Yeah. Well, I think we got it. We definitely changed the dynamic a little bit here. All right, we're going back into neutral. Let's shut her down. All right. Ran it again, probably about 12, 13 minutes just now. Let's go ahead, put her back up.
Put it down on locks, by the way.
Okay.
Because we're professionals.
All right. You get that. I'll do this.
It's starting to get hot down here.
So this is drain number technically 2 or 3, depending on how you want to look at it.
That's a lot better. It's the color of gear oil this time.
With the transmission all finished up, we're going to do the engine oil now while things are still warm. Ben, we're supposed to do this in a clean fashion and not make a mess. Did you not get that memo? I know you're new here, but...
I did not get that memo. I also grabbed the, you want to grab this drain bolt?
Yeah, just leave it, dude. Let it get full of oil so that we make a bigger mess. Oh, it's hot. Ugh. Are you got that? You good?
Yeah.
That actually looks really decent. I did clean out the drain pan here so we can get a good look. Just one last drain and fill. I think will give us enough confidence to get this car up and running for good. I kind of feel bad doing this. I bet this oil filter is perfectly fine. It looks perfect. It's only ran for those 20 or 30 idle minutes, but we'll go ahead and replace it. And for our final fill up, we're going with the full synthetic. Of course, it's Pennzoil Platinum. And I love this because you can pick it up at the local Walmart, which means you're getting the best price on the best oil possible. And they carry it in a bunch of different weights here. We've got 10W30, which is what the ZR1 calls for from the factory. I gotta tell you, I was extremely skeptical when I first got the ZR1, found all that water on the dipstick that we would ever get this far. And now I'm the exact opposite. I'm about as optimistic as you can be. We've got a running ZR1 and it's just such an anomaly. I'm still trying to comprehend how so much water got in the drivetrain, but none got in the interior, not even damp carpets. GM must have had really excellent weather stripping back in the day, because on all these other modern cars that got flooded halfway up the car, I mean, the interiors are soaked, they're destroyed. Imagine if we were dealing with the mechanical side of this rebuild and an interior electrical nightmare, like it probably wouldn't be worth saving, but we are in a really good spot right now. We just need a few more things to get this car on the ground and make it drive under its own power. First off, I need a little bit of hardware, simple stuff, because, well, some of it was old, some of it was corroded, and we've been replacing a lot of little wear components off camera, like the U-joints and whatnot, as we've had stuff apart. So that's the easy part. The second thing, we just have to cross our fingers and hope that we're gonna be able to break this clutch away from the flywheel. There's a few different tricks we can do, but we really need the car on the ground and moving under its own power to attempt to do that. If not, it's gonna be a clutch job, which isn't expensive, it's just a bit time consuming. And last and most importantly, we need the power key. The biggest feature of the ZR1 when it debuted back in 1990 was its 385 horsepower, but you had to activate that horsepower with a special power key that goes in the center console. And remember, our car came with no keys whatsoever, so I don't have the power key. But from 91, which is what model year we have, all the way to the end of the run, the power keys were all the same. The cuts are identical. It's not like a door key where they're unique to each car. They're the same, which you think that there's a bunch of them out there for sale, and there's a handful of them, but people want top dollar. And we're not talking about an original one with the Corvette emblem. I'm talking about duplicates, blank keys that someone cut that cost them $1 plus the fee to cut it. They're charging $150, $200 for these things. This is just ridiculous. And of course, I like to keep everything on a budget, so I've lucked out and landed on a free solution I'll be sharing with you guys in the next video. If you can't wait for it,
Be sure to hit that like button. Also, why don't you follow me over on Instagram, where I'll post a little snippet of our first 385 horsepower drive with the ZR1 there before anything goes live here. And as always, guys, I can't thank each and every one of you enough for watching today. I'll catch you very soon.
Yeah.